Hi guys. Today's topic is about government policy and international trade. There are two learning objectives in this topic, and I hope that by the end of this topic you should be able to first identify the policy instrument used by government to influence international trade flow. Second, understand why government sometimes intervene in international trade. The patterns of import and export that occurs in the absence of trade barriers is called free trade. Despite the advantages of open and free trade among nations, governments have long intervened in the trade of goods and services. Government intervention can be either in restricting or supporting trade. Trade restriction policy refers to unfavorable or unsupportive trade instrument to importers. It is imposed on foreign countries that are selling goods and services to the home or domestic country. The objective of trade restriction policy is to protect the local or domestic industry, which are affected by imported goods. Hence, domestic goods will appear cheaper than imported goods. Therefore, demand on domestic goods increase. Now, how about a trade promotion policy? It refers to a favorable and supportive trade instrument to exporter. That is, the support provided to local or domestic producers in the home country which are selling goods and services to foreign countries. The objective is to encourage and promote the local or domestic industry to export more to foreign countries. There are two general categories of trade barriers available to government: tariff and non-tariff barriers. A tariff is a government tax levied on a product as it enters or leaves a country. A tariff increases the price of an imported product directly and therefore reduces its appeal to buyers. A non-tariff barrier limits the availability of an imported product, which increases its price indirectly and therefore reduces its appeal to buyers. Let's take a closer look at tariff and the various types of non-tariff barriers and classify a tariff into one of two categories. An ad valorem tariff is levied as a percentage of stated price of an imported product. A specific tariff, on the other hand, is levied as a specific fee for each unit. It can be measured by number, weight, and so on of an imported product. Nation can use tariff to protect domestic producer. For example, an import tariff raises the cost of an imported good and increase the appeal of domestically produced good. In this way, domestic producers gain a protective barriers against imported goods. Next, a restriction of the amount measured either in units or weight of a good that can enter or leave a country during a certain period of time is called a quota. After tariff, quota are the second most common type of barrier. Governments typically administer their quota system by granting quota licenses to the companies or governments of other nations, in the case of import quotas, and domestic producers in the case of export quotas. A government may impose an import quota to protect its domestic producer by placing a limit on the amount of goods allowed to enter the country. This helps domestic producers to maintain their market shares and prices because competitive forces are restrained. In this case, domestic producers win because their market is protected. However, consumers are lost because of higher prices and limited selection attributable to lower competition. A complete ban on trade, either imports and exports, in one or more products with a particular country is called an embargo. An embargo may be placed on one or few goods, or it may completely ban trade in all goods. It is the most restrictive non-tariff trade barrier available, and it is typically applied to accomplish political goals. One example of a total ban on trade with another country is the United States embargo on trade with Cuba. Although some medicines and food from the United States are now allowed to enter Cuba. Local content requirements are laws stipulating that producers in the domestic market must supply a specific amount of a good or service. These requirements can state that a certain portion of the end product must consist of domestically produced goods, or that a certain portion of the final cost of a product must come from domestic sources. The purpose of local content requirement is to force companies from other nations to use local resources in their production processes, particularly labor. Restriction on the convertibility of a currency into other currency are called currency controls. A company that wishes to import goods generally must pay those goods in a common internationally acceptable currency, such as the US dollar, European Union euro, or Japanese yen. Generally, it must also obtain the currency from its nation's domestic banking system. Government can require companies that desire such currency to apply for a license to obtain it. Therefore, a country's government can discourage import by restricting who is allowed to convert the nation currency into the internationally acceptable currency. Regulatory controls or bureaucratic rules designed to impair the flow of imports into a country are called administrative delays. This non-tariff barrier includes a wide range of government actions, such as requiring international air carriers to land at inconvenient airports, requiring product inspection that damage the product itself, purposely understaffing custom offices to cause unusual time delay, and requiring special licenses that take a long time to obtain. The objective of all such administrative delay for a country is to discriminate against imported products. It is also being called as protectionism. For trade promotion, first we have financial assistance. Financial assistance to domestic producer in the form of cash payment, low interest loan, tax breaks, product price support, or other form is called a subsidy. Regardless of the form of a subsidy takes, it is intended to assist domestic companies in fending off international competitors. This can mean becoming more competitive in the home market or increasing competitiveness in international markets through export. Next, we have foreign free zones, which refer to the designated geographic region through which merchandise is allowed to pass with lower custom duties, taxes, and or fewer custom procedure. There are four major types of free zones. We have free ports, free trade zone, export processing zone, and special economic zone. These free zones allowed components to be imported at discounted price from the normal duty levied. Free ports are considered to be the broader term of a free zone as they include a rather large area and can cover a wide range of activities and incentives to promote economic development and trade. They can include several free zones or be constituted of a single one. Free trade zones are considered to be enclosed, duty-free areas for the purpose of providing warehousing and distribution facilities supporting trade, particularly re-export. They are commonly near a point of entry such as a port, an airport, or a land border. The focus is on commerce such as finished and semi-finished goods. Export processing zones are offering incentive for manufacturing and related activities with a particular focus on export, although several such zones allow non-exporting activities. And last, special economic zones are a free port paradigm that has been particularly applied to the Chinese context as a tool to promote foreign direct investment in well-defined areas. The main purpose is to import parts and raw material and process them into goods to be exported to international markets. Learning the government regulation of other countries can be a daunting task. A company must know whether its product is subject to a tariff or quota, for example. Governments of most nations, therefore, have special agencies responsible for promoting export. Such agency can be particularly helpful to small and medium-sized businesses that have limited financial resources. Government Trade Promotion Agency often organize trips for trade officials and business people to visit other countries in order to meet potential business partners and generate contacts for new business. They also typically open trade offices in other countries. These offices are designed to promote the home country export and introduce business to potential partners in the host nations. For example, Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Malaysia is responsible in assisting domestic producer of Malaysia in international trade. Now that we have reviewed the various instruments of trade policy that government can use, it is time to look at the case for government intervention in international trade. Let's take a closer look at the political, economic, and cultural motive for intervention. Political arguments for government intervention cover a range of issues, including preserving jobs, protecting industry deemed important for national security, retaliating against unfair competition, and also protecting consumers from dangerous products. Perhaps the most common political argument for government intervention is that it is necessary for protecting jobs and industry from unfair foreign competition. Competition is most often viewed as unfair when producers in an exporting country are subsidized in some way by their government. For example, it has been repeatedly claimed that Chinese enterprises in several industries, including aluminium, steel, and auto parts, have benefited from extensive government subsidies. So, countries sometimes argue that it is necessary to protect certain industries because they are important for national security. Defense-related industry often get this kind of attention. For example, aerospace, advanced electronics, and semiconductors. Although not as common as it used to be, this argument is still made. Those in favor of protecting the United States semiconductor industry from foreign competition, for example, argue that semiconductors are now such important component of defense product that it will be dangerous to rely primarily on foreign producers for them. Some argue that government should use the threat to intervene in trade policy as a bargaining tool in order to help open foreign markets and force trading partners to play by the rules of game. The United States government has used the threat of punitive trade sanctions to try to get the Chinese government to enforce its intellectual property laws. Lax enforcement of this law had given rise to massive copyright infringement in China that had been costing United States companies such as Microsoft hundreds of millions of dollars per year in lost sales revenues. After the United States threatened to impose 100% tariff on a range of Chinese import, and after harsh words between officials from the two countries, the Chinese agreed to tighter enforcement of intellectual property regulation. Furthermore, many governments have long had regulation to protect consumers from unsafe products. The indirect effect of such regulation often is to limit or ban the importation of such products. For example, in 2003, several countries, including Japan and South Korea, decided to ban imports of American beef after a single case of mad cow disease was found in Washington state. The ban was designed to protect consumers from what was seen to be an unsafe product. Together, Japan and South Korea accounted for around 2 billion US dollar of beef sales. So, the ban have a significant impact on US beef producers. After 2 years, both countries lifted the ban, although they placed stringent requirements on US beef imports to reduce the risk of importing beef that might be tainted by mad cow disease. For example, Japan required that all beef must come from cattle under 21 months of age. For the economic motive, the infant industry argument is by far the oldest economic argument for government intervention. According to this argument, many developing countries have a potential comparative advantage in manufacturing. But new manufacturing industry cannot initially compete with established industry in developed countries. To allow manufacturing to get a toehold, the argument is that government should temporarily support new industry with tariff, import quotas, and subsidies until they have grown strong enough to meet international competition. For the strategic trade policy argument, it has two components. First, it is argued that by appropriate action, a government can help raise national income if it can somehow ensure that the firm or firms that gain first mover advantage in an industry are domestic rather than foreign enterprises. Thus, according to the strategic trade policy, a government should use subsidies to support promising firms that are active in newly emerging industry. The second component of the strategic trade policy argument is that it might pay a government to intervene in an industry by helping domestic firms overcome the barriers to entry created by foreign firms that have already reaped first mover advantage. Nations often restrict trade in goods and services to achieve cultural objectives too, the most common being protection of national identity. Culture and trade are intertwined and greatly affect one another. The culture of one countries are slowly altered by exposure to the countries and the people and product of other cultures. Canada also tries to mitigate the cultural influence of entertainment products imported from the United States. Canada requires at least 35% of music played over Canadian radio to be by Canadian artists. In fact, many countries are considering law to protect their media programming for cultural reasons. The downside of such restriction is they reduce the selection of product available to consumer. Here we have some examples of how Malaysia intervenes in trade based on cultural motive, which the country believes these two movies, as shown in the slide, are not in accordance to the national culture, and thus it was banned from showing in the cinema. So we have one Padmaavat and also Hustler. Both movies was banned by Malaysia due to sensitive content that not according to the national culture of Malaysia. So that's all for now. Thank you and see you in the next topic. Bye.